Hey, welcome to another episode of Affordable Housing and Real Estate Investing. I am your host, Kent He, and here on the podcast, our goal is to highlight why affordable housing is the best way for you to build wealth for your family and friends while doing good. Now, today we have Mel from PMI Atlanta West. They are a property management company that manages over 100 plus units, almost 80 pad splits right now. And he came onto the show and he is going to tell you what are the best neighborhoods to invest in the co-living space like PadSplit within the Atlanta market, and also which areas to avoid and why. Now, he went through things like how much parking you should really need to have for your property, so the chances of it succeeding as an investment will increase and mitigate some of the risks that you might be looking at when it comes to pad splits. And you're going to be able to learn how they screen tenants, how they scale the property management company over time, and how their team looks like. So you're going to want to watch this entire episode to get all the nuggets, all the gems from Mel. I'm already planning on hiring them for our property management company for our first passport. So I can't wait. So let's get into the highlights and let's get into the interview.
In the Atlanta market, shared bathroom rooms, anywhere from, at this point, they used to be lower, but anywhere from 160 to, if it's a really big room, maybe as much as 190 in the right area. Whereas a room with its own bathroom, you can easily fetch 275, 300 a week. Our properties over in that area perform very well. The tenancy is very consistent, very little turnover. You could charge more. People just want to be there, and it's almost that I like to think, people who are like kind of getting their lives together, if you would, and they're like, you know what, I don't want to live around any riffraff anymore. Or I just want, when they're really getting things together, they tend to gravitate to areas like this.
Okay, welcome to another episode of Affordable Housing and Real Estate Investing. Today, we have been covering a lot about PadSplit recently, especially around a co-living space, but we've never had a property manager who specializes in pad splits onto the show before. So I'm really, really excited to welcome Mel from PMI Atlanta West onto the show today, because we want to share all the secrets of how do you manage the pad splits, what issues might come up, and we're just going to learn a ton from Mel today. So without further ado, Mel, welcome to the show, man. Just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how did you get started in all this, man?
Yeah, well, first, thanks so much for having me. This is great. Appreciate the invite. So this is an extension of my investment journey, essentially, this property management company. I've been licensed as a realtor since 2006, but didn't start investing until 2018. I had a W-2 job, wanted to make a way out of that. I basically was interested in growing wealth, creating some financial freedom, the FIRE movement, if you would. But knew I wasn't going to. It wasn't in terms of stopping to work, but yeah. So I started investing in properties in 2018 and grew a small portfolio. The more effort and energy I put as the portfolio grew, the less attention I was putting to the W-2. Finally, made that leap of faith and was like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do for active income? We already had a few properties, that the retirement was starting to look better, but I still needed active income. I'm a young guy, well, relatively. I did do some retail sales. I thought I was going to flip. It ended up just being another BRRRR. So that was my strategy, was sort of, buying, rehabbing, renting, refinancing, repeating. And I just found myself with the property management hat on. I consider myself more of an asset manager. Like I'm not so transactional. My asset of choice is a single family home because I know it. I know Atlanta market very well. I grew up there. And it's a good market to invest in. So I like to take the asset, put it in its highest and best use, and keep it there. And focus my attention on keeping it performing at its highest and best use. We did traditional long-term, we did some Airbnb. As we continued down the road, we kind of fell into something with PadSplit. I literally, it was a Facebook. A lot of my social media friends now are just folks in real estate. And I posted on one of the groups that I have this new property I'm developing, and I was going to look for an Airbnb co-host to expand my Airbnb business, basically. Someone was like, "Oh, have you heard of PadSplit?" I just did a little research, liked it. I thought it suited this property well. So we decided to go with it. Next thing I know, I put another property on PadSplit. And at that same time, I was starting this property management company. So PadSplit was asking me, "Hey, do you want to manage more properties?" And I noticed there weren't a whole lot of PadSplit property managers, and I was like, "Sure." So we essentially that was the beginning of this. We built this property management company around PadSplit. Since we've grown our long-term rentals as well, but majority of those have come from PadSplit owners who really like the way we manage, and they said, "You know what? We want to bring more of our properties over to you." So yeah, that's how we got into it.
Whoa, what a great story, man. Because you guys kind of fell into it, but then naturally you saw a need in the market and something that you were willing to kind of take on. Because I've talked to a lot of investors. Finding great property management companies are extremely, extremely hard. But to see that you are getting that validation from third parties, meaning there are other people that not only had a great experience with you, but they want to bring you more business. That is so cool. That shows that you're doing absolutely all the right things. So in your portfolio right now, like how many PadSplits are you managing, and how many long-term rentals are you managing? Is it can you share like a proportional split or something like that with our listeners?
I'll just tell you the number. So just look, actually, we have 72 active PadSplits under management, which is,
wow.
In the beginning, that would have seemed crazy to me, but funny enough, not even funny, but we've got our processes and procedures in place. We've been doing it for so long that now it's easier to manage these 72 than it was probably 30 when we were there.
Wow.
So we have 72 PadSplits under management and growing. I mean, we're developing another one ourselves. We have a couple of investors working on a few more. So we'll be at 80 pretty soon, I think. And then we have about 55 long-term. And all this growth is literally, we do not do any marketing. We actually turned it off because I didn't want to grow too fast. So it's just all word of mouth. Yeah.
I respect that though. You said, "Hey, let's not grow too fast. Make sure our systems and processes are catching up and they're responding well, so that you are setting a strong foundation for growth."
Yeah.
And I love that, because when I was in corporate America, I just saw that people grew and grew way too fast, and now you have almost like these narrow pipes of that represents your process, and now it's just like leaking and bursting, and water's bursting at all the seams and stuff, because you didn't get the foundation set up correctly. So I love that you guys are doing that. That's a great up model. Well, you got some long-term rentals and you got some PadSplits. How would you tell a investor what is kind of like your biggest differences between managing a long-term rental compared to your PadSplits?
Yeah, so PadSplits have a lot more moving parts. I like to think that it's sort of like but they come with the benefits of the long term. You have people that want to stay longer, but you have a lot of cleaning. You're responsible for everything with the house as a PadSplit investor, like the lawn care, the cleaning, the pest control, room turns. You gotta you do the cleans and punch out work when rooms are turned. You're responsible for all the utilities, but you receive the kind of returns you receive in Airbnb, maybe better than it's very comparable with short term, but you get the benefits of more consistency that you would get with the long term. And there's ebbs and flows. I think when a new PadSplit property comes on, you haven't you don't have the mature house with members that have been there for a long time. Sometimes, there's a stabilization period. I like to. Sometimes it's quick, but I would give it up to like 6 months to get members that are going to stay for a long time. It's probably not typically 6 months, but I'm a conservative person when I analyze things. So yeah, there's just a lot more moving parts. From an investor standpoint, though, I mean, we handle everything. You can be as involved as you'd like to be to a certain extent, but our goal is to help you have what they call mailbox money. Yeah, everything we handle, every ticket that comes in. You don't have to be involved at all. Some of our investors are completely hands off, and really that's the goal for us. I mean, I like to do things a certain way. It allows us to be to do this at scale. If I have all the same locks, ultimately, it's not to this point, but to exaggerate about every house was the same paint, every floor was the same, every door was the same. If everything was the same, it would be easy. So I pushed towards that in order to do this at scale.
Wow. I mean, that's some great tips though. Like even when people are renovating their properties nowadays, they have a expert like yourself to consult with and say, hey, what have you seen worked well in other properties? And you are naturally inclined, like you could make it more efficient. If someone is familiar with the same locks, right? It's much easier to maintain, update, and potentially change over the locks if there are any turnovers. So I absolutely love that you are enforcing a standard because naturally it also makes everything else easier. Is there anything that you do specifically that you have seen like, hey, I've seen these issues in the property management industry, and this is how we stayed on top of it and solve these issues? Like anything that you can kind of guide our investors think about, like ultimately, I want the investors listening right now to say, well, how do I know this property management company actually knows what they're doing, right? You seem like you know all your stuff, but any sort of advice you have there on how investors can kind of tease out whether or not a property management company is a good property management company based on some of the stuff that you do?
Yeah. So, I mean, if in vetting a property management company, what comes to mind to me is I would ask that property management company, like, why do you do this? What is their why? Or, what is the reason they got into business? You tell me a little bit about how you do things, why you do things. Because the property manager and investor are really much more aligned than any other person working on your property. I think your contractor wants to come in, you have a scope, he wants to do it and get out of there as quickly as possible. We're doing this, we're in the long haul with you. We want as I alluded to before, we want your property to perform at its highest and best use. So I think a highly investor mindseted property manager is what you want, especially with PadSplit. With traditional long-term rentals, that's a sort of, I guess, tried and true. I mean, I think PadSplit is pretty tried and true at this point, but like it's been it's been around for quite some time. It's a business model that you don't have to be an investor to emulate. You can just say, I want to be a property manager and go start this long-term property management company. But with PadSplit, I think especially you want someone who's very investor focused. And with that, I go back to the highest and best use. Like we want to maintain our properties and all the properties for our investors as leanly as possible and as profitable as possible, while also, of course, providing the best like living experience that we can. So I think you just ultimately it's that. I think that your property manager should be more of an asset manager mentality than just a business that manages properties.
Yeah, and I really like that you one of your questions, like, are they investors themselves? Because sometimes it's very hard to convince a quote unquote property manager about what is going on in your head. Like you are an investor yourself, Mel. So that infinitely that makes the communication and understanding way more smooth compared to like a different class of property managers who don't actually invest themselves, because you understand the need for one, producing profits, maintaining the property, but also ensuring your residents are happy in their pad
Yeah.
splits. So maybe this is a good transition then. What types of properties have you seen in your career? Like you guys manage 72, almost 80 units now. What types of properties have been like the most successful when it comes to investing in PadSplit? Like, for example, how should investors look at a property to determine whether or not it might be a successful PadSplit?
Yeah, sure. Um, so the biggest value are going to be en suites. Any room with its own bathroom is, what's the percentage? It's considerably more. I'll throw rates out there, I guess, to be clean, to be very transparent about it. So I'd say in the Atlanta market, shared bathroom rooms anywhere from, at this point they used to be lower, but anywhere from 160 to, if it's a really big room, maybe as much as 190 in the right area. Whereas a room with its own bathroom, you can easily fetch 275, 300 a week for those rooms. So rooms with their own bathroom, rooms with their own private entrance. These are a little bit harder to come by, but bigger rooms are definitely a higher value. We've tested the market and played with different pricing, and we see for sure bigger rooms tend to they get bigger, they get better rates, and they get people that don't want to leave. The area has a lot to do with it. Um, uh, what else? Um,
Well, you
yeah,
mentioned bigger rooms. Like how big are these bigger rooms, right? Do you have like a square footage? Is it 10 by 10, 10 by 12? Any sort of specifics you can give around that?
okay, yeah, on the bigger room, I would say up, 15 by even as big as 20. But once you
Wow.
get to, 15 by 15 or something like that, that's a, 10 by 10 would be considered, standard or smaller, really. Um,
Mm.
uh, um, yeah, and I can even say, like, different areas, like for instance, on the east side, Stone Mountain, Decatur, they tend to have a lot of bigger, the houses are bigger rooms, but that, there's it's not just black and white. You also may pay more for the house, so you got to look at all
Mhm.
factors. Decatur has been known for having a little bit more regulation. However, I do see all across the board, I feel like PadSplit more and more is becoming accepted and understood, even with all municipalities, because we haven't had any, with all these houses, I don't have any code violation issues going on, and if I and in the 3 years that we've been doing this, I mean, I've had just maybe 3 or 4 code violation reports, but never any, nothing. It never went any further than a warning or whatnot. But yeah, yeah. So 15 by 15. Some of the, yeah, if you can get bigger than that, then yeah, those rooms do well. And sometimes maybe putting a desk in something in a room like that goes pretty far. Yeah, the type of folks that live at these pad splits. There's all kinds of workers, but there's quite a few gig workers, temporary workers, and folks who might do some online freelance work, stuff like that. So having a space of their own in the house that really, makes them feel comfortable is important.
Oh, that's great to know, man. So I love your point about ensuite bathrooms because that seems to be in really high demand. A little bit in contrast with Airbnbs, because Airbnb sometimes people just want more beds for more beds and heads, heads and beds. I mean, and
Yeah.
so what about parking, public
Yeah.
transportation? What have you seen in terms of the gravity of or the impact or the magnitude of those factors, and does that play into the success of the properties? Is it How would you prioritize? Is it parking first? Is it distance to public transportation first? Is it just rooms with, larger rooms? Like, how should investors prioritize sort of these, what I'm calling, like, there's intangibles, which is parking, distance to transportation, because you can't make that nicer, and
Yeah,
compare that to other tangibles, which is you can always add an extra bathroom. It's just a matter of how much money you got to spend. How would you advise investors to look at
right.
properties like that?
I think parking is overlooked sometimes. I think it's pretty big. I think you want to be as sure as you can with the parking. Like houses on a corner lot are fantastic, or a side street that maybe dead ends by the house where there's going to be basically plenty of places to park, or of course a bigger driveway. You can always, not always, the landscape. Like if it's flat enough, you can add. A parking pad. If it's a sloped lot, it's going to be harder to do that. But I think you need to take heed to plenty of parking. I would say I would say you want to have at least 70% or something like that of enough parking. So if you got 8 rooms, then maybe at least 5 or 6 spots to park. If you can avoid the on-street parking, that would be good. Plenty of off-street. So yeah, I think that just it provides a better experience. We've had those are some of the things that we've had come up. People complaining about the parking, and then of course neighbors could complain about that. So I think it's parking you want to take heed to. As far as public transportation, that's depending on the location. So like in Atlanta, for sure, south side for sure, but in areas like say on the west side, Cobb County, public transportation is not crucial really at all. And even in Decatur, I think it's more important in Decatur to have access to good public transportation. On the east side, I'd say Decatur, but yeah, so the east side versus like the west side. Yeah.
And those were some specifics, man. Thank you for being so specific, because I think that really gives some concrete and substantial data points for investors to look at. So you mentioned some neighborhoods. You talked about Stone Mountain. You talked about Decatur. What areas or neighborhoods have you seen in your portfolio, either the ones that you own or the properties that you help manage, as sort of the best performers for rental rates or best performance for occupancy? Have you paid attention to any of those numbers, and like any sort of advice or wisdom you can share about which markets or areas are the best for PadSplit?
Yeah, I definitely pay attention to it high level. I don't get as much in the details as some people do. My wife, who's my business partner, is a CPA, so I don't have to really think about the numbers as much as but I am very much from a high level perspective. I do pay close attention. So you have to be careful in Cobb County. Cobb County is not so open to pet like all of Cobb County, but there are areas where I think you can do this quite, and that's one of my favorite. It's just the inventory is going to be a little bit smaller, and you don't want to go to the wrong neighborhood in Cobb County, and you're going to have some issues with neighbors if that's the case. But it's a very desirable place to live. So people who our properties over in that area perform very well. The tenancy is very consistent, very little turnover. You could charge more. People just want to be there, and it's almost that I like to think, people who are like kind of getting their lives together, if you would, and they're like, you know what, I don't want to live around any riffraff anymore. Or I just want, when they're really getting things together, they tend to gravitate to areas like this. Decatur too. I mean, I grew up in Cobb County, so maybe I'm a little partial, but it's not that I'm partial. It's more that I know it so much. But I've been, our highest performing property is in Decatur, but it's a huge property. It has 2 en-suites. One of those en-suites has a balcony. The other one is huge, really big. The other rooms in the house are it's actually a 10 bedroom. 9 of those rooms are enormous, and there's one small room. So that's why it performs so well. And then, so two of them have their own private, exit doors. So, but it's been consistent. We have very little turnover in that particular property. But yeah, in general, and some folks, I mentioned earlier, so Decatur was known for, DeKalb County, I should say, because it's not just Decatur, it's Stone Mountain, it's DeKalb County. They were known for being a little bit more, I guess, strict when it comes to, and for instance, I think the law, there's 4 unrelated people technically are allowed to live in the same house. However, I say that, but then on the other hand, all this time, we've had many, we have that 10-bedroom there. We have plenty of properties over there. We don't have any issues. We've had, I can remember one where, a neighbor was not so happy. We've reduced the size of a house over there for a little while, and then since we've built it back up and having no problem. So. And in the Decatur, you have a lot more. There's plenty of opportunities. There's plenty of houses. Like, if I were to just say which area has like the most opportunities for PadSplit, but definitely Decatur area, in the south side too, like Riverdale, Jonesboro. However, there's a lot more smaller houses down there, so less opportunity to get the big, great performer. But you can do it. There's some, we actually,
Well, this is interesting because you mentioned Cobb County. That's COBB, right? Did I catch that correctly?
That's
Cobb County.
That's good.
Okay, yeah. So you have Cobb County. You have Decatur. We've heard Stone Mountain. I've heard of College Park from Blake as well. Is that going to be a pretty good area for PadSplit as well?
College Park is so. I guess it's incorporated now. I should know this for sure. But like South Fulton, I believe College Park is sort of isolating themselves from there's Clayton County to the south, Riverdale, Jonesboro, Union City. But College Park is a little bit closer to the city and is considered South Fulton, which is, I believe, incorporated of its own now. Some folks were concerned that they were going to be more, impart more regulations and these kind of things. But it's a good area. It's a really good area. We manage a few in College Park, and again, when considering all the factors, the price point in College Park and on the south side is better than you're going to get anywhere else.
Now, what about these neighborhoods? Why are they so good? You mentioned Cobb County because like people just like that area. Is it what have you seen to be the driving factor? Is it like proximity to a work location? Because College Park, the South County area, that's really close to the airport, right? I'm not sure what's in Cobb County. Decatur seems like there's a lot of highways that goes like a straight shot into the city. But what have you seen? Maybe I break it down to questions like, who are the people that are renting out PadSplits? Like, are they just like factory workers, gig workers? And 2, why are these neighborhoods so popular?
Yeah. So, and again, I want to stress the fact too with Cobb County, because you have to be very careful. There's just there's little pockets. I don't. And actually, there's some folks that I don't have any properties in northern Cobb County, say, Kennesaw, Ackworth, but there are some PadSplits out there. We focus we have our business, and we have a couple in Marietta, bordering Smyrna, Austell, like Douglasville. So this is moving a little bit further west of Cobb County, Douglas County. But what I see in that area is just more stable folks, people who are, ready. They might have a little bit more stable job, less of a gig worker, more of maybe it's I'm not, I have had a teacher in one of our houses before. But just folks who are just a little bit more stable, and like sort of mentioned, I feel like the people, when you move to Cobb County, that you're trying to get your stuff together. You want to be around other people who have their stuff together,
Got
if you
it.
would. And so I see just a more stable. We have a house. The house there. This has just amazed me. We do think clean. Like the house is cleaner than it's a PadSplit, and it's cleaner than my house. Like it's so clean all the time. Like it's a smaller PadSplit. It's only 5 rooms, but like it just blew my mind. Yeah. Like every time I go in there, I'm like, wow.
Well, that's really cool. What area? So you mentioned there are pockets that people should absolutely avoid. What are those areas that, in your opinion, that people should avoid, just as like a general rule of thumb?
It's I think of it more of like areas that there's fewer areas in Cobb County that you can effectively do a PadSplit in. There's so if I were to like Windy Hill, if I give you the road, like Windy Hill west of South Cobb Drive, and then so Windy Hill west of South Cobb Drive, and then kind of from there southwest is okay, but anything northwest, I think of Windy Hill, you're gonna run into some issues until you get further north to like parts of Kennesaw are probably okay. Ackworth, again, I don't have business up there, but I'm just assuming. I grew up in Kennesaw, but like you're gonna have basically a lot of 500,000 or like this point, 600,000 and up houses around. You probably don't want to do PadSplit near there, but there's just pockets where there's more renters near like in that area. There's what's close to that in Cobb County is the it's like the section like the jail and the dump. There's a lot of Bell's bondsmen and stuff like that. Yeah, but basically, like I said, like Windy Hill west of South Cobb Drive, southwest of there, all the way into Austell, Mapleton and Austell. Those areas are okay.
Got it. Well, that's super helpful. I'm sure there's tons of people that's gonna rewind that piece of the podcast just to like write that down. It's like, oh, that is so good. Thank you so much, Mel. That helps me so much, especially for some of us out-of-state investors, right? Like we rely on experts like yourself, Mel, to help us decide like, hey, is this a good area? Might this be successful? Because like you said, we're both aligned. We both want to maximize the output from the properties, but also want to make sure we're doing the right thing that doesn't cause us all these headaches. So we talked a little bit about that. Maybe we touch a little bit upon screening tenants. Like, do you guys have a specific criteria that you use to screen tenants before placing them into the PadSplit properties, or do you generally rely on what your investors' sort of appetite or screening criteria might be?
Yeah, so we before we didn't really have a choice. So PadSplit does the initial screening, and in the past they did all the screening. As of late, they do send us the members who basically have applied to our PadSplit and allow us to approve or deny. And to be honest, my team probably knows even better than I do. But like essentially, we don't. If they've had any evictions, we don't. We deny. There's so much demand for this. It's really insatiable that we're pretty. If we've seen any eviction, if we've seen them like jumping houses at all, not staying, not having much tenure in a PadSplit, we'll deny almost any reason that we can. We will deny at this point. If we even see odd things like they've been approved for like a huge amount, to us, it's telling us that they're sort of maybe potentially doing something mischievous on their qualifications. So yeah, but essentially, yeah, we just our staff looks at every applicant, and if they appear to be pretty stable, they've been in the PadSplit for another for a while, they have no evictions, their income level, looks looks pretty good, then we'll approve. But we're almost looking for reasons to deny, if you would. Like, I hate to say that, but like, most, but I say that also, I can say that, majority, over 80% of PadSplit members are great. I mean, even across our portfolio, I mean, we're probably at, I don't know, probably close to 600 rooms, actually 500 rooms or so that we manage. There's maybe truly at this point, maybe 11, 12 that are in eviction. It's like 3%, 3 to 4%,
wow.
less than 4%, like 3% that might be an eviction. So.
Okay, well, those are great stats. But interesting enough, like you set me up perfectly for the next question I really want to ask you, because look, a lot of investors, right? Especially for newer investors, they always think about what can go wrong, right? It's fear that's driving their decision, or it's causing them to kind of freeze up and go into analysis paralysis mode, or just think about all the bad things that can happen. You just mentioned eviction. So let's talk about maybe we'll talk about 3 problems. Like, I want to talk about neighbors. How have you guys handled it? I want to talk about evictions. How have you guys handled that? And any sort of like member to member dispute. So let's talk about like, what do neighbors usually complain about, and how have you dealt with that issue?
Okay. Okay. So what's I'm sorry. What was the order of the questioning? I'm sorry.
Let's do neighbors. Let's do neighbors first. Like, what do neighbors typically complain about, and then we talk about evictions and member to member disputes after that.
Yeah. So one of the things that neighbors want to just be peaceful. They want to live in their house peacefully, for the most part. Like, one of the things we talk about parking. That's one of the things I always look at. Like, okay, if they do park on the road, are they going to be like right outside of the neighbor's driveway, where they're not going to be able to freely go in and out of their driveway? We haven't had any neighbor complaints in quite some time. And to full transparency, we used to manage for PadSplit. They brought everything in house. Like, they have their own portfolio of houses that they they have a fund, and they buy houses that we used to manage for them. Though that's actually the last time we had a neighbor dispute. They have since moved it into their in-house property management company that we still get plenty of investors come over from those. But we've had funny enough, this isn't really a PadSplit thing. It's we've had them complain about leaves that my landscaper. Yeah, he does a good job. I mean, he definitely wouldn't have blown them into their yard, but it just comes to mind as something that came up. But it's really the parking. That's why I think parking is really important. There has been a concern about with these houses. This is something that's really important. You need to have at least 2, preferably 3, like trash bins, exterior trash bins for the trash service, because that's something we've had to do a lot. Like, we've had to contract people to come take and it's going to cost a lot just to come dump the trash if it's getting out of hand. So we've had some complaints about that before. But if you can keep the house as nice and neat and members is, we haven't had any issues with like loud parties or anything like that, or loud or members just being loud outside the house. More parking and trash, if anything else. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So that's, I mean, not a minor issue, but it's something that can be remediated. One, by looking at your properties and seeing like, hey, am I buying a property with enough parking? And then obviously getting as many trash cans as possible for trashers, so that you're not overflowing it and causing a sore sight for your neighborhood there. So that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned you
Yeah.
have gone through evictions. Can you just talk us through like what the process looks like when you have to evict a PadSplit member? Because it's slightly different, right? Versus a long-term rental tenant, because you're trying to evict a tenant that's in a room shared upon the entire house. Like any sort of
Mhm.
gotchas or watchouts that you can share with our listeners today that might be worried about this?
So the gotcha or watch out would be, for some reason, this has been very, very rare. We've had um, a couple of these situations, maybe three in total across the years. But funny enough, two of them were relatively recent, and with the same investor. This was just the wildest thing. I feel bad for him, but now we got it under control. We're good. Um, where you could get we've had a like culture of non-paying, so we've had somebody come in and like just be this, either threaten or convince other members not to pay, and like get almost the whole house to not pay and go, and many of it, and that this is like the worst horror story ever, and it's very, very uncommon. Again, like I said, we have maybe 3% across the board of evictions. And in those situations, I mean, unfortunately, and they might be very violent. We've had our guys go, and it's a touchy situation. I don't want anyone to be harmed, of course. But it's generally somebody who's and to that point, 3-4%. It's a statistical fact that like 3-4% of the population is just the general population in the whole world is something like that is sociopathic, narcissistic, those type of things. So you can similarly and PadSplit. So it's usually someone like that who might cause the problem. It's a bad apple. I kind of really spoils a few others, and it gets bad. This is very, very, very uncommon. But that's like the worst scenario. But even that, like you talk about people being fearful or whatnot, of course it really suck if that happens. But if you're committed to this, we will get to the other side. I mean, like my team hates to deal with anything like that. Like it's really, and I care. You know what I mean? Like I want it to perform. I want everything to go well. So we're in there in the trenches. Having to go there and do what we got to do to manage that situation. But if it's so bad, then we can't really do. Our hands are tied to a certain extent. I mean, it's not like we can get the mafia or whatever to go in there and do something. But in general, with evictions, we might have one, at the most two, in a house at a time. Usually one. And what we do, if the member hasn't paid, we communicate. We have our team reach out to that member and try to communicate via the app or call or text. We have our on the team on the ground members go to the house. We'll go and physically post a notice to vacate on their door, not just like on the front door, but on that member's door, which seems to work well. Kind of embarrasses the people, puts them on on highlighting the house. It's a little bit more real at that point. Generally, that gets people to leave. It's just the people, I think, with a little bit more, maybe almost social disorder type stuff that might not leave. But yeah, we just do a good job of just staying on top of it. I think we've had houses come over from other property managers, and it appears that they just didn't go, like did more so that, I want to say the bare minimum, but just weren't as proactive about making an appearance. Some do a phenomenal job. I've heard there's this PadSplit landlords group, and I hear some stories about some people who I'm like really impressed with what they do and their numbers keeping evictions extremely low across what they manage. But in general, we do a really good job, and we just I think it's just being involved, just being a little bit proactive about it. But post a notice to vacate if they stay at that point. We typically use a company called Evict For Me to process the eviction, and almost in all cases they'll leave before we get to the court date. But there are a few that we get to the court date, have the writ, and have to do a set out and all that. But maybe 1% gets to the set out.
Got it. So if I were to say it back to you, right, it sounds like when someone doesn't pay, one, you communicate with them. You might get to a notice to vacate that gets posted onto the door. And then after that, if it really comes to the fact, you got to bring them to court, go through the eviction process. And in the worst case scenario, you got to get the sheriff's county involved, I'm guessing, to evict them, right? Like from person. Okay. And how long does the process take now? Because I think this is probably the last sort of unknown. It's like, oh, I'm going to have this headache for so long. What have you seen in terms of timeline has like an eviction taken?
Starting to speed up, but up until now, like it's, I would say on average, and I hate to say it, but it is like on average of maybe is up to like 6 months. But it's like prior to the moratorium and all that, it was like 2 months. After that, the courts got backed up and this and that. Then it was more like 6 months. I think it's starting to trend back towards a shorter time frame. And I've seen Evict For Me. They have done something recently to connect with the magistrate courts and the lawyers in there. They have, I think, they seem to have lawyers in all jurisdictions, or at least a couple we've seen, and they're able to get things moving along a bit more quickly. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the video, it seems to me that the municipalities are becoming more aware and more comfortable and more understanding of this PadSplit model now. It's taken a little time for that, but I see that happening. So yeah, it's starting to trend a little bit quicker.
Got it. And I think for investors out there, right? Yeah, your longest scenario might be 6 months. So let's say like worst case scenario, right? This person being evicted, stays in a home. Maybe they cause a bad environment, it causes everybody to move out. In my opinion, like I would set aside 6 months of reserves for my property, just in case the worst case scenario happens. And now I can truly say like, hey, when this happens, because it's going to happen, even though it's really, really rare, I can at least be prepared financially to handle that issue if it were to come up. That's how I would handle it. I don't know. Do you have any recommendations from people on like, hey, even though this eviction might have taken so long, what have you seen in terms of like effects on other folks in the house? Have you seen like everybody else also moves out as well? Any sort of stories you can share there?
No, not typically. No. Like I said, it's usually the one or two bad apples in a house, and then again like that, and it's a matter of getting them out. That's part of that stabilization. We might see it happen earlier in a PadSplit, but once you kind of get a house stable, you get some mature members in there. Maybe you had that one eviction there out, and finally somebody comes in that's gonna stay. I think one of the best preventers of the eviction is to care about your asset, like care about like what you're providing, the location. If you take these things into consideration and not just like that's what I see. To me, sometimes being the biggest problem is, and not to fault anyone, it's understandable based on you're in this to build wealth and make money and do your thing. But like when you only think about it from your perspective, those are the types of situations. Those are the type of that's when the problems come in. I mean, knock on wood. I like out of we're personally we're on our fifth pet, but we had one other that was a co-living too. But anyway, and I've never had an eviction in any of my houses, but I've also been very keen on the parking, the like how I want to provide the best the best. I want it to be like if I was if I needed to, would I live in this house? yeah, I want to feel, based on the area, the parking, the quality of the construction. I think if you have the right intention, I don't know, if you, it's kind of sort of an energy thing here, but like, with the intention to provide the best you can, it's like the yeah, the whole aura of PadSplit will take care of you too, in a sense. So, um, yeah,
Yeah,
I think,
I completely resonate with your philosophy there, Mal, because
yeah,
right, I mean, I was born like there's 9 of us in a 2 bedroom apartment. In this scenario in PadSplit, at least almost every member gets their own room. So you start to have you build dignity, right? You provide a home that you're proud of, that one you're willing to live in yourself. And that's why there's all these other things like I'm thinking of, like, hey, I already budgeting for, I don't know, every room to have their own personal refrigerator. It might be a small
yeah,
refrigerator, but I want them to have independence, right? It's very important to create a home for someone because this is their home. And
yeah,
when you have great parking, you have a great product, you have the right vibe, that's why people generally stay. Because if you're in a bad situation, most people would try to get out of a bad situation, one way or another. It's just human survival instincts. That's it. So I really like what you have talked about there, Mel. And maybe this is a part like, hey, are there that you just raised a really good point? Are there any mistakes that you see other investors making in this area of password that you can also highlight so that our audience can learn a little bit from those mistakes that you've seen?
okay, yeah. So, again, it's partly that, just to reiterate on just having the right intention, having at least some, like this, like PadSplit says it great. I don't know if this is Atticus's phrase or whatever, but doing, do well while doing good. Like, care about doing good. Like, if you have some caring about doing good, I think you're going to have more success than someone who doesn't. That's first. I think overlooking parking, sometimes that's been an issue. And then just being not so much like from an amenity standpoint, but just like the shell and the MEPs that have, like, making sure that you're not going to have any plumbing issues. Like, I don't, I think septic is a bad idea for sure. I mean, it's pretty, like, I guess it can be done. We have a couple that we manage on septic, but it has been an issue. Not of late, thank goodness. But so, going ahead and scoping that pipe, making sure that, especially if you have older, let's say you have the cast iron pipe to the street, it hasn't been updated to PVC, but just in general, just pay attention, close attention to the plumbing to make sure that it's clean. There's not especially then if there's like trees anywhere near the, make sure there's no roots. Like, just go ahead and pay that $450 to have it scoped. Make sure there's nothing wrong with the plumbing. The main drain line. I see, and even the sometimes you can't catch everything. Like, sometimes you're not going to catch until the house is lived in. Your contractor's not in there taking showers every day. But yeah, I would pay close attention to the plumbing in general, especially the drain line, but also the peripheral lines running into the main drain, like coming from the shower. We've seen a lot of that where we've had to come back and fix a leaking drain from a bathtub or shower. HVAC. We pay very close attention. Those are the two main things, and electrical should be fine, but like, yeah, the HVAC, making sure that we've seen people do a renovation and not add a supply line to a room. There's a new room with no supply line. Don't let that happen, for sure. And then, even so, having your HVAC, having your contractor ensure that there's airflow. Like, I would before I would go, like, well, I'm doing the run it right and make sure that there's airflow to every room. Those are the two biggest things, I think, from constructional, is HVAC and plumbing.
Yeah. So I think this is the perfect example of like, guys, don't cheap out in the beginning. If you address all these issues up front, it actually will cost you a lot less money. Because imagine you have a flooded bathroom or something like that, and For some reason, it's not livable space. Now everybody has to move out. That could be really, really costly versus if you just spent the money up front, corrected all these issues. One, it'll make your life less stressful, but also make Mel's life a little less stressful, and they'll probably like working with you more.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
this is really, really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you have a bunch of this expertise already. Mel, I forgot to ask, like, what does your team look like right now? Because I know you're working remotely, right? You have a
Yeah.
team in place. You've scaled. You have over 100, almost close to 130, 150 units. What does your team look like? How many people do you have like on the team? How many people are visiting the locations or rental properties? How many handymen or
Yeah.
plumbers you have on staff? What does your team look like?
Yeah. So we have 4 full-time handymen, which are great. And
Wow.
I like to use this analogy that and it was hard to find those kind of people. And this is part of, but this, if I'll take this all the way back to 2006, because even then, even when I was working a corporate job, I played real estate a little bit on the side. I managed for my dentist. He had a house, and I managed for a couple. And I've always sort of and I've been like I do stuff too. A little, I used to, and would work with handyman here and there. I sort of learned to build these relationships with people. So I like to use the analogy that I've built the bad news bears of the of property management, which a lot of people may not get that reference, especially younger folks. It's a movie from the 80s, and my memory might be foggy, but it was a guy who he was a great baseball player. Then he goes on, he was like a drunk or something, and he goes through AA, goes back to his hometown. He's like, what am I going to do with my life? And he found all these rascal kids from the neighborhood, and then created this this championship baseball team of all these bad kids, So it's not, property management is not the funnest. It's hard to find people who want to go change a lock or fix a toilet. And but you find, I found so I have 4 full-time maintenance folks. I have another property manager. So I'm a broker in Atlanta. She's an associate broker. She does a lot of our long-term stuff, but she also does some of the PadSplit stuff. Mateja, my CPA, she's a CPA. You want her looking at all the numbers. Like from the time she was a kid, she looked at every receipt. I'm very lucky to be able to work with her. We have 5 full-time virtual assistants. So this is really huge for us, out of the Philippines, because they're really good. And we're with technology, PadSplit having this platform, everything is easy to find there. Then we have our property management software. We utilize WhatsApp. We have all these different groups, like the plumber group. All of our maintenance guys have their own group, but they have all the VAs on that group. We have the main maintenance team group. So we've set all these groups through WhatsApp for communication purposes. So we know when. It was so crazy at first when we're all on one group. It was like, oh my God, it's just, but it's broken out now. So it's we have relationships with. We have a great plumber that we call on. He's part of a GC group. He's not a full-time guy for us, but we can always call on him, and we still have to. We pay his boss basically, not him when he comes. We have, there are electricians. We had one that was really good, and we've had another. So we do have some good ones. So, but we have a handful of subs that are easy to call on. We have 3 HVAC guys that we can call on. We have a lawn care provider that he's really good. He's grown. We've helped him to grow. We got 2 cleaners, pest control company, and that was part of it too. This whole my whole journey really was. I want to provide. I want to help people have an opportunity to grow. Pretty much almost all the people who have come to us, it's been a great opportunity for them to grow themselves or their business. And I try to do that. Even with my team, it's about, I want to empower them. I want them to make decisions. Some of the VAs, it's funny because they've come to us and they almost always want you to, they just want a task and just to do the task. But see, I meet with them every single day. I go through every single ticket with the VAs every single day, and then and try to it used to, I would do things, and then eventually our head VA, he's better than I am. He started taking on the task, and I always sort of, I tell him that we have pep talks or whatever. We talk about things before we get into the nitty gritty sometimes, about empowerment and this and that. And I want you to make decisions. It's going to make you a better whole person and all this stuff. So yeah, that's
Dude, I love your management style, because I think people the discount when they have VAs on a team. I'm so glad you talk to your VAs every day, because that's what it takes to be successful in this, guys. Like you get out what you put in. And Mel, when you put in this much time working with your team, that's a sign of a great leader, because you're investing in your team, and actually you get to reap the fruits of the labor, because for all the effort that you put in. And I have one VA, and what I've taught her to do is just simply, hey, just pretend this is your business. What would you do if you were in my situation? And I almost had to, because we're the type of guys that want to do everything and solve the problem right away, right? We almost had to pause a little bit and say, hey, I need to teach this person how I think. Because sometimes it's easy to tell people what to do, but to teach them how you think, that's where the magic really, really happens. Yeah. And I think that's what I've found to be successful. Like, I got Airbnbs, but my VA helps me manage the messages for some of the folks, right? So that's all important. But it took a while to train them up. And I still review all the messages, make sure it's going through smoothly. But at least I am one step removed from that process. And I love the system that you have created, because now you have handyman, you got an associate broker who is also your property manager for your properties, but you got 5 full-time VAs. So someone's always looking at these tickets or issues whenever they come up, so someone can respond to them right away. So you can spend more time with your family. It makes perfect sense. I love the system you made, man. Absolutely love it. Maybe this is a great part to ask this question, because this is a question I ask everybody else, right, Mel? And this question is really important to me, because I think I started this podcast, one, to collect all the pieces of the puzzle to help the next generation. If we don't solve this problem in our generation, it's like help them prepare on, at least give them a head start in solving this big problem of a massive shortage of affordable housing. Why do you think affordable housing, particularly the lack of supply, is so hard to solve for? And is there anything that you think people can do? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think PadSplit has, sort of nailed it on the head, at least from one angle, in taking existing supply to help solve this problem. There's all these rooms, there's all this space that generally would go to just 1 or 2 people, or even sit vacant. So taking this existing supply, because I think, the biggest thing is, affordable housing is not so sexy, right? It's not, people don't typically build for affordable housing. And I mean, I sort of see why. I mean, if you're going to spend all the money to develop, you typically want, you're building A class. Generally it's A class. If we talk about apartments, right? People who build are building A class apartments. Those A class apartments eventually become C or D class apartments. So people aren't out there. And then if you talk, just in general, even when I start, you just think, okay, I'm going to be a flipper. I'm going to, everyone's, looking for the bigger and better things. They think that's where the money is. And affordable housing is just very much overlooked. But I think again, what PadSplit is doing is huge, and I think also with maybe folks are going to start going back to the office, but there's a lot of existing supply that should and can be converted to solve this affordable housing. I mean, there's still quite a few. In Atlanta, I see the dilapidated or schools or other bigger buildings that it's going to take some work to reconstruct them in a way that you could have affordable housing in there. But if the government, if we could, those could be some subsidized projects, or if you could get some private investors who really cared about about affordable housing to develop it, and maybe have a longer perspective on like when they're going to get the return that they might need. But yeah, but I think the reason that it is so low is that everyone's developing the latest and greatest thing, and building for B and A type renters or potentially buyers. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I think sometimes the numbers need to work, right? And I think
Yeah.
this PadSplit model provides investors with the opportunity to provide affordable housing, so that this weekly rental rate. I mean, that doesn't sometimes if your minimum wage is like $15 an hour, that's about right. That's where people can usually pay about a third of their income, and this is just another solution to the problem because it's such a massive problem, man. And
Yeah.
PadSplit helps address this one segment of the population that we can help. And that's why I see this as an exit strategy for so many folks out there who wants to get some yield, provide some supply to the lack of affordable housing, and everybody can contribute in their own way. So, man, I can't thank you enough for coming on here, Mel. I mean, seriously, without people like you, like I would have never had the home I grew up in. I sincerely, sincerely thank you for getting into property management. It's not an easy business. It takes a lot of work and even more work to scale it up to where you are today. It's took a lot of discipline, I'm sure, and a lot of sweat and tears. But
Yeah.
it's amazing. And I can't wait to work with you on some deals. Like I definitely want to work with you as our property manager for sure.
Wow.
Just full disclosure, this is not a solicitation for investments, not financial legal advice. But seriously, I really love what you're doing. I love everything that I've heard, especially when it comes to how you treat your team and how you treat your residents with respect. Those are the type of people I want to work with and be friends with, man. Seriously, like
Yeah.
I can't wait to get a coffee with you. Well, for the people that want to reach out to you, engage you, Mel, where can they find more information about you guys and get in touch with you guys to hire you guys as a property manager?
Yeah, really easy at PMI Atlanta West.com. PMI Atlanta West is, all of the social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram. And yeah, email. It's just Mel, pretty easy, at PMI Atlanta West.com. And Mateja, not so easy. So I'll spell that. It's Mateja at PMI Atlanta West.com. Mateja at PMI Atlanta West.com. Yeah. So Mateja is from Slovenia, where we actually spend a lot of time now. We're able. This was I'll allude to that. Like this whole investment journey was for me. I did want to free up and be able to do things kind of remotely, and a part of it was just. I think when we talked before, I mentioned like sort of letting go and just going into yourself and believing that it can happen. And I believe anyone. There's no question. I don't even. I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, like anyone can create the life that they want. I mean, certainly we have to live in some laws of the universe or whatever. But if you can do it. You can find your way. And I felt when I first started to travel. That was with Mateja to Slovenia and parts of Europe. And I was like, what do these people do? Like I just met all these interesting people doing these different things. And I was like, oh, I don't have to do things this way, the way that I've, been brought up in 9 to 5 or and I think a lot of investors have that in mind. And that's what we are. We're a vessel to help them. I know for me, I was able to do my own property management. I was fortunate to do that, but that might not be the exact path for everyone else. But PMI Atlanta West is an extension of me wanting to get this freedom in my life, and I do it. I'll tell the audience. I think about you guys every day. I say like affirmations and stuff. This is what we do. We provide this. Like we're a vessel for this. So hopefully it helps some people.
Man, I am so inspired right now, dude. Like I'm gonna get out this call, I'm gonna analyze some deals, and I just want to put more offers in because I really want to work with you, Mel. And hey guys, if you guys are still listening to this, make sure you hit like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, And don't forget to leave a comment, because I would love if there were any questions that we didn't answer today, that you have questions for Mel and Mateja, like leave them in the comments, because I want to bring Mel back on with Mateja in probably 6 months, 12 months. I don't know. Maybe after we set up our first property, we can bring you back on, Mel, and we can just simply have a conversation like what that process entailed, so that, again, pulling back the curtain, everyone can figure out like, oh, so this is the process that we will go through to work with Mel to set up a property. I think that could be really cool topic to kind of go through, because then we will have a case study from beginning to end. And I think that's going to be really fun, man. So, hey, I had an amazing conversation with you today, man. And I really, really appreciate your time. I can't thank you enough. Thank you for coming on and sharing all your nuggets and all your secrets with the audience. I think you have provided tremendous amount of value. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. This is a great opportunity for me as well. This is the first, and ultimately, I want to have impact, right? And this is a way that you can. So, I really commend you for what you're doing and providing that kind of impact for people. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate you. And we are out.
All right.